When disaster strikes, can small businesses count on the federal government for the resources they need to get back on their feet? I'm Edward Siegel, a leadership strategy senior contributor for Forbes.com and author of the best selling and award winning book, Crisis Ahead: 101 Ways to Prepare for and Bounce Back from Disasters, Scandals, and Other Emergencies. My guest today is Isabella Guzman, the administrator of the Small Business Administration. She's here to talk about the SBA's recent reorganization and how it'll help improve the financial help it provides to companies after a flood, hurricane, tornado, or other disaster. Well, welcome to the show, Administrator. I'm glad you could join us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You recently announced that the Small Business Administration had completed the second and final phase of a reorganization of its disaster program. Why were those reorganizations needed in the first place, and why now?
Yeah. Well, everyone knows that the SBA had to scale dramatically during the pandemic to reach the needs of all our businesses and nonprofits with our incredible PPP, as well as the COVID EIDL and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and the Shutter Venue Operator Grant. We obviously during the Biden-Harris administration were really committed to making sure that we could implement these programs with speed and certainty in order to achieve that kind of scale and really the precision that we needed within these programs. I had initially in the summer of 21 moved the COVID EIDL program, which had always been serviced. All of my disaster loans had been serviced by my Office of Capital Access team in the past. And so during natural disasters, they service those loans. And so I instead moved the entirety of the loan apparatus into the Office of Capital Access, really with an emphasis on you look into the future and resilience that we need to try to build up in our communities. The SBA serves not only the businesses during times of disaster and the nonprofits, but also the individuals, because those are the customers and the employees of our businesses and a really critical part of sustaining a community. And so with the shift of the lending to a single operation in order to achieve scale and more efficiencies, we are, in addition, focusing within our office, newly named as the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience, a focus again on preparing small businesses and homeowners and renters and communities for the need to pivot and adapt and be resilient in the face of increasing natural disasters and any disruption that they face.
So, what happened in each of the two phases of the reorganization?
Well, the SBA, obviously, we were able to transition smoothly. Our lending programs during COVID EIDL's height, we were able to clear a million backlog and start putting out up to $1 billion a day at its peak during the pandemic to continue to support our small businesses with critical financial relief that they needed to position their business to be able to survive and now thrive. We recognize as well, though, that we want to be on the ground quickly. We want to be there and meet our businesses and our individual disaster survivors with our products and services. And we want to leverage the whole of SBA and all the resources that we have to help communities recover. And so the incredible team at the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience have been better readying and collaborating with emergency managers on the ground to ensure that the SBA can do just that. So they have leveled up their response and focusing on supporting communities with as streamlined of a support as possible, and being more thoughtful and bringing the whole of SBA to the table to make sure that we can help communities with the long tail of recovery in recovering from a natural disaster and the impacts it has.
So, after all is said and done, what does all this mean for small businesses, and how will they see if there's anything different on when they need your services?
Yeah, I mean, I think small businesses are going to continue to see that the SBA is there in partnership on the ground with local chambers and local partners to ensure that we are there for them to serve them with the products that they need for disaster, whether that's physical disaster impact or just the economic injury or both. And we're hoping that we can continue to invest in that customer experience that is higher performing, as well as technology, so that we can ensure that the products are equitably distributed, and known, and are meet the needs of those businesses as quickly as possible. And so I can only expect to see, increased improvements as we work across the whole of government to really leverage our expertises and bring them to the table for our disaster survivors, which is something the Biden-Harris administration is really focused on in the face of climate change and increasing natural disasters and their large impact, financial impact in communities. We want to make sure that we focus on that customer experience and for the disaster survivors, so that they can rest assured that the federal government is there to support them.
Those partnerships you just mentioned, are they already in place around the country, or are there gaps and you have to scramble to get those partnerships in place when a disaster strikes and there's no existing partnerships?
A lot of times we already have all the pre-existing relationships. As a great example, we of course deploy advisors across the network through a small business development center network, America's SBDC. Those SBDCs that are funded by the SBA help businesses on an everyday basis start and grow their businesses, access capital. But during disasters, oftentimes they're the ones who are alongside us, ready to deploy, to help us either co-locate with them or be on the ground to make sure that they are referring businesses to us. So obviously, those are some natural partnerships that exist already, and we are ready and deploying all of our networks, our women's business centers, as well as our SCORE chapters, those great mentors, and our veterans business centers, wherever we can to better deploy our small businesses. So those are our ongoing partnerships and relationships. And oftentimes we already have great relationships with the local cities and counties, those emergency managers, especially in communities that have repeat impact by disasters. And so we're ready to deploy, and oftentimes are able to be quickly on the ground, working in coordination, of course, with our federal partners who are there to help immediately respond to disasters.
How did those partnerships and relationships change, or did they, after the reorganization was completed?
No, I mean the face of SBA disaster has always been within our Office of Disaster Assistance, now the Disaster Recovery and Resilience Office, and those relationships have just continued without disruption at all. And so we're not seeing any hiccups or disruption of service. If anything, we're able to lift up and prioritize a focus on recovery and ensuring that our field offices in the East and West are fully able to deploy and leverage headquarters support to focus on the tail end of recovery, and so that we're there for communities and able to deploy.
Can you walk us through the steps that were taken to help guarantee that the organization was done the right way, for the right reasons, and done on time?
What I saw in California when I experienced disasters is not only the small business advocate, but the lead on the economic recovery support function within the state of California. I saw that a lot of times smaller communities were unable to fully deploy with large economic development teams, on the ready, and so it's really critical and important that the federal government can leverage its resources to ensure that communities can have that small business economic development deployed as quickly as possible. So, if anything, I think the SBA has been readied for this moment. We do. Have strong resources locally on the ground to be able to deploy and align with our Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. And so those natural collaborations that exist across the SBA and our partners on the ground have existed for some time. And so, if anything, we're creating a better structure at the SBA to fully deploy them. And as I said, with the Office of Capital Access always handling the servicing of our disaster loans, this was just another added step of being able to deploy on the underwriting for these important and vital direct disaster recovery loans. And so I'm excited to see that it's been a seamless transition. But what we obviously, in responding to a quick need for scale and response during the pandemic relief was thoughtful and resulted in a strong transition of one product, starting with COVID Idle, and then a planned execution to ensure that the whole of the disaster portfolio could be managed within the Office of Capital Access as well as within the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. And so it's obviously during that type of massive event and disaster of the pandemic, there are key learnings in our operations that we were able to glean that have now helped build a stronger SBA.
What should other federal agencies learn from how and why the SBA went through this reorganization?
Well, I think that what's important to know, I mean, in the SBA as an agency that focuses on entrepreneurship, helping to deliver that American dream of business ownership, we work with folks who every day have to pivot and adapt to respond to the market. And I've asked my team to be as entrepreneurial as the small businesses we serve. And really always think about that customer experience first, as every small business owner has to. We need to constantly reflect on the changing environment that our small businesses face, as well as our disaster survivors in the event of a disaster where we help individuals. And that's what's at the heart of everything that we're doing as we transform all of our products and services at the SBA to make sure that we can focus on resilience and help support our businesses as they build, start, grow, and strengthen their businesses with resilience.
Can you give us an overview of the different types of disasters that the SBA has responded to recently?
Yes, and of course, we collaborate with our federal partners, FEMA, to ensure that we can support on disasters. We also have SBA only declared disasters. Currently, we're tracking 13 different SBA disaster declarations across the country, from coast to coast. Obviously, tracking some of the most recent news with the snowstorms and rain in California, but it's everything from most recently in the last several months, from the flooding that we've seen across the states to disruption from gun violence as we track what's happened in Monterey Park and small business impact and whether or not there's potential for support from the SBA. And so on an ongoing basis, the SBA is tracking natural disasters or any disruption that can be supported with our loan programs, whether that's physical disaster or economic injury.
Well, given all the experience your agency has, what lessons about preventing, managing, and even recovering from a crisis has your agency learned over the years?
I think one of the first things is that the experience of the disaster survivor who's oftentimes overwhelmed by the situation. We need to be as responsive as possible to help support with a simple product that they can navigate. Whether that's helping them rebuild and collect data and information that they need to apply, or setting up portable and local response, meeting them where they are so that we can walk them through the application and give them that high touch technical assistance that they may need to go through. I think that we have heightened sensitivity to the challenges that oftentimes underserved communities face. Those communities that are low to moderate income, or in addition, people of color who may not necessarily be as aware or in touch with the SBA resources. We've gone above and beyond to try to ensure that there's equity in our program and access, that there aren't language barriers or cultural barriers or long-standing inequities that limit access to our programs. And I think that's something that we think about and apply across the whole of SBA as we are focused on a mission of filling gaps to ensure that entrepreneurship can thrive and that communities can recover from disasters.
In the corporate world, it's considered a best practice to, after a crisis has passed, to do an analysis about how well or poorly the organization responded to that crisis. Does the SBA do anything similar after it's worked on a disaster, whether it's floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, or anything else?
There's after every disaster, yes, and in collaboration with our, if it's if it's in partnership with FEMA, then of course SBA joins that after action analysis to ensure that any learnings from a specific natural disaster can be translated into improvements in our service, our offerings, our product mix, and how we're able to deploy to help disaster survivors. Regardless if SBA is solo, we always are continuously iterating on our products. We have to be responsive to the marketplace. We have to continually evolve to make sure that we're supporting our small businesses, our nonprofits, as well as our individuals. And so it's an ongoing best practice at the SBA in particular in having to respond at such scale to most recent pandemic disaster that we ensure that strength of management exists across all of our program offices. And obviously, during this time, we've had to reassess and look at our structures to make sure that we are able to constantly collaborate across our program offices, so that there's strong lines of communication open, so that we can all share those insights post an event.
Well, based on those analysis that you do after disaster, can you provide two or three examples of what you're doing differently today that you might have been not have been doing in years past?
Yeah, most definitely. Well, one in particular that we recently have started to pilot is we recognize that sometimes there are hard to reach communities, and we need to be more mobile and agile. And so instead of locating at one business recovery center, or in partnership with any of our federal partners at any physical location, we want to be on the road. And so we've developed a portable assistance center concept where we can use technology, use generators to go on the road and set up with a tent, fully operational with our computers and our staff, to be able to help a community that perhaps is a little bit further out or harder to access, or where we may not have a local site available immediately. So that is, one initiative that we've launched recently, where we've really tried to, get into communities and be more flexible to be able to be on the road. And I think in being able to deploy those resources across natural disaster experiences is something we're focused on trying to build to scale, so that we can be mobile when we're responding to disasters.
FEMA, of course, will often pre-position materials, supplies, and even staff ahead of a natural disaster that they can anticipate, such as floods, hurricanes, or tornadoes. Do you do the same thing with your staff, or you move them and your materials only after disaster is struck?
We obviously aren't part of the immediate response, and so our footprint is much smaller. We do need, obviously, equipment, computers, to be able to deploy for our staff across the country. We have centers across the country, so that we have some gear in place to be able to quickly deploy. But it's not to the same scale as FEMA, obviously, that has to respond and help with whether that be search and rescue, et cetera. So we oftentimes have a much smaller footprint to be able to deploy more easily and readily, but we do have resources spread out around the country as well.
And FEMA, of course, is often one of the first federal agencies to arrive at the scene of a crisis. How does SBA work with that agency to provide the help that businesses need to get back to normal operations as soon as possible?
As the President Biden often says, it's we deploy a whole of government approach, and we are lock in step with FEMA and ensure that we're being good federal partners and following suits. Obviously, the first responders need to be on the ground. SBA is there to provide recovery, and so there's a timing that we like to coordinate, and so we are lock in step with FEMA to ensure that we are participating at the right time in a safe manner, and as soon as possible to deploy to our small businesses and our individual renters and homeowners who are going to need to recover.
So, based on your experience as administrator of SBA, what steps do you think business executives should take before a crisis to help ensure that they can return back to normal as soon as possible after the crisis has ended?
There's so much focus that needs to be given to preparation. Resilience is about being able to survive that disruption in operations, or disruption to your normal lives. And as a disaster survivor, whether that's your apartment that you're renting, or your home that you own, or your business that you operate, or your nonprofit that you operate. Being able to be prepared is critical, and that might be that you mitigate. Disaster loans at the SBA come with an option to increase that physical disaster loan by 20% to mitigate for future disasters, whether that's raising electrical to prevent damage during flooding, or providing resilience in hurricanes. There's efforts that can be made physically to build up resilience. But in addition, just in terms of best practices for business, little things that we try to teach in preparedness, and making sure that documents and data are in the cloud, that there's a plan in place for your business to quickly recover and be able to reach out again to your customers and deploy operations as quickly as possible. So we are working hard to make sure that our resource partner network across the country is, as well as through the leadership of the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience, can ready as many of the community members as possible to be able to handle that disruption of a natural disaster or any event.
President Biden recently announced his proposed budget for next year. How does your agency fare in his proposal? And are you concerned that there might be any efforts to cut back your existing budget?
Small businesses have been front and center as the president wants to deliver on an economy that works for everyone, including our small businesses. And these small businesses oftentimes are at startup stage or early in their development, or even as they're looking to grow and sustain their business. We know that they need resources, and we are seeing a strong proposal from the president within the Small Business Administration, and our key programs from lending that maintains strong fortification. We do a great number of loans and investments in small businesses to keep their growth strategies strong. And then we are also seeing a continued support for an expanding network, as we want to make sure that our small businesses know how to navigate resources and know who to go to help improve and respond to any situation that their business faces. So we are obviously hoping to see that kind of support for continued growth and support of our programs at the SBA. And of course, taking into consideration that the SBA is maybe done with deploying that relief, the PPP program, the restaurant program, et cetera. But we still sit with a large portfolio of the COVID EIDL, which is, of course, that was a 30-year loan, nearly 4 million loans, a 30-year loan. And so we are servicing those loans on a continuous basis, as well as working with our grantees within the restaurant and shutter venue program to continue to support those businesses and nonprofits who receive support during the relief. So we are continuing to request support for the SBA so that we can do the work that was so necessary during the pandemic and continue it and position us for success to deliver against our mission.
Have those loans been a burden on the companies and organizations that have received them, or they're managing pretty well to pay them back or to meet the terms of the loans?
The PPP was a forgivable loan. We're at nearly 94% forgiveness levels at this point, which is great. Those businesses were oftentimes saved with PPP, and they were able to get additional support that, especially for these high impact industries, potentially through grant programs like the Restaurant Reorganization program or the Shutter Venue, but if not, the COVID EIDL. Which was, even though it was a low-cost, affordable loan that we tried to defer as long as possible, we did begin servicing this program in mass, and Obviously, small businesses are still continuing to face challenges in the marketplace, including managing their balance sheet and trying to keep it strong. So, we at the SBA will work with individual borrowers, and we've done a great job in trying to ensure that our small businesses could get the customer support that they are going to need as we continue to service their loans within this program. So, but for the most part, I'm seeing a lot of opportunity on the horizon for our small businesses. The Biden-Harris administration is investing heavily in America, and small businesses are the ones that are going to get those contracts to build the bridges, and they're also going to be the ones who get to leverage improved broadband in communities to do their businesses online more effectively, as well as participating in American-made manufacturing and supply chain support that our country needs in the clean energy economy of the future. So all of those opportunities are helpful to our small businesses, and it's really about driving revenues to our small businesses. A strong balance sheet means, not only being able to sustain and maintain and access capital, but in addition, growing your revenues. And so we're really focused right now on trying to make sure that those revenue growth opportunities, as we implement the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, that our small businesses are able to access those opportunities.
What are the challenges that you see ahead for the agency?
For the agency, I think the biggest
Okay.
challenge, obviously, is to continue to maintain the budget as requested from the president to deliver our services for our small businesses. We want to make sure that our programs are deployed and that our small businesses are supported at this critical time where their growth is the requirement as they're trying to survive and thrive continuously. In addition, I think on an ongoing basis, making sure that we can continue to evolve and develop our products and services as we have been doing for the last 70 years, as we'll be celebrating our 70th year anniversary this summer. We know that we have to continually evolve, and so challenging the whole of the organization to make sure that our products meet the changing face of entrepreneurship, which is increasingly women and people of color. And that we can help contribute to the economy as a result, as our small businesses are the ones creating the jobs and delivering for our economy globally.
I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but before we go, what's the most important thing you'd like our listeners to remember from our conversation?
The SBA was often called the best kept secret in government, and that's not a branding that we were a big fan of. And so this moment in time where the SBA scaled dramatically and was able to reach millions of small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program or the critical COVID relief programs is an opportunity for us to leverage that into awareness of critical resources that can help small businesses. So as much as possible, if we can continue to collaborate across the federal government, across the private sector, to make sure that small businesses are aware that there are free and affordable resources, affordable capital, and free advisory networks across the United States through the SBA, that's going to improve our economy. So we hope to continue to build those partnerships and share the information out there to the community that at SBA.gov, small businesses and innovative startups can get the resources that they need to start and grow.
That's it for this edition of the Crisis Ahead podcast. My guest today was Isabella Guzman, the administrator of the Small Business Administration. Be sure to come back next week for more advice and insights on preparing for, managing, and recovering from a crisis, or subscribe to Crisis Ahead wherever you get podcasts. Remember, it's not a matter of if a crisis will hit your organization or company, it's when. And the sooner you are prepared for it, the better.
Produced by Heartcast Media.